Welcome everyone to Beyond Curious. If you like videos like these, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us to grow the channel. And leave a comment with what time and where you're watching from. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories like these. Now let's begin. My name doesn't matter for this one. Call me the contractor, because that's all Haldane Metrology's badge system ever called me across the 6 weeks I worked there. I'm an instrument calibration technician, 29 years old. The kind of job where you get flown into a facility, sign 3 NDAs before lunch, and leave without ever being fully sure what the client actually does. Haldane did quantum sensing, specifically on the 3rd floor behind a door that needed 2 badge taps and a spoken code. A physics team was trying to hold a gram scale piece of niobium in 2 positions at once, long enough to measure it properly. I'd read the public version of that kind of research months earlier. A university team had done something similar with a speck of metal that spring, made the news for about a day. Haldane's version was bigger, better funded, and not public at all. My job had nothing to do with the niobium. I calibrated the vibration isolation sensors 2 floors down, in a sub-basement, making sure the readings the physics team trusted upstairs weren't secretly measuring a delivery truck idling in the parking lot. Routine, quiet work. 12-hour night shifts, because daytime foot traffic in the building threw off the baseline. The first anomaly happened 9 days in, a Tuesday, a little after 1 in the morning. I was walking the sub-basement corridor towards Sensor Bay 4 when I passed a maintenance closet and saw myself standing inside it. Not a reflection. There's no glass in that hallway, nothing that could throw one. I saw a woman in my jacket, my badge lanyard, my exact posture, checking a clipboard for maybe half a second. And then the closet was just a closet, mop bucket and all. And I was alone in the corridor holding my actual clipboard in my actual hand. I decided it was fatigue. 12-hour shifts do strange things to a person's eyes around hour 10. I finished the sensor bay, logged the readings, and didn't write the closet down anywhere official, because there's no field on a calibration sheet for briefly saw myself standing in the closet. It happened again 3 nights later, and this time it wasn't me. Marcus ran the overnight security sweep, a heavy-set guy in his 50s who had a habit of cracking his knuckles one at a time whenever he was working through a thought. I said good morning to him at the elevator around 6, clocking out same as always. Then I rode up 1 floor to drop off a spare badge and pass Marcus again in the stairwell. Still in his jacket, still mid-knuckle crack. 3 minutes after I'd watched him walk out the front doors on the library camera feed at the security desk. "You're still here?" I said. He looked at me as if I'd spoken in a language he didn't recognise. "Been here all night. Why would I have left?" "I saw you leave, on the lobby monitor." "Wasn't me. Crack, 1 knuckle at a time. Maybe you're more tired than you think." I didn't push it further. What was I gonna say? I watched you leave twice from 2 different directions, 3 minutes apart. I pulled the lobby footage the next afternoon, using an access code I still technically had, and watched Marcus walk out the front doors at 6:02. Jacket, thermos, the whole routine. Then I scrubbed back to 5:58, the timestamp for when I'd been passing the stairwell on my way up with the spare badge. The footage was there. The time stop counter was there, running normally, seconds ticking forward exactly as they should, but the stairwell camera itself, the only one that would have shown me passing Marcus a second time, had 4 seconds of nothing in it. Not static, not a black frame, 4 seconds where the counter kept counting and the image simply didn't update, like a page that forgot to turn. I watched those 4 seconds 9 times. I never told IT. By the 3rd week I'd started a private log. Not on the company system, just a note on my phone. Not of the settings themselves, those I could almost talk myself out of, one at a time. But small physical discrepancies were harder to argue with. A coffee mug on the break room counter that was left of the sink when I started my shift, and right of the sink 12 hours later, with nobody's badge logged as having entered the room in between. A supply closet where the mop bucket had been red for 6 straight weeks, and was for exactly 1 shift, unmistakably blue, and red again the next night, with none of the day shift janitorial staff having any memory of a blue bucket ever existing in that closet. There was one more incident before I worked up the nerve to say anything to anyone with a physics degree. I was in Sensor Bay 4, reading calibration numbers aloud into my recorder the way I always did. A habit from training that let me catch my own mistakes on playback. Halfway through the sequence, the recorder picked up a second voice reading the same numbers half a beat behind mine, in my own exact cadence. The way a bad phone connection sometimes doubles your own words back to you. There was no phone in the room. I played the recording back 4 times that night, alone in my car in the parking garage before I trusted myself to drive. By the 4th playback, I could no longer tell if the second voice was actually there or I talked myself into hearing it. Somehow that frightened me more than either possibility on its own. I brought it up exactly once to a physicist named Dr. Ansel Voss, who I only knew because he occasionally rode the elevator down to complain that our vibration readings were, in his words, contaminating his coherence window. Voss had a tic he seemed unaware of. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose with a knuckle instead of a fingertip every single time, like clockwork. Hypothetically, I said, if your setup upstairs actually worked, if you really held that thing in 2 states at once, would anyone down here feel it? He pushed his glasses up. Feel it how? I don't know. See something that shouldn't be in 2 places? Or that shouldn't be there at all? The isolation is total, he said. That's the entire point of your job, calibrating around exactly that possibility. Nothing leaks. But if it did leak? He went quiet for a second, actually turning it over instead of dismissing it. Somehow that frightened me more than if he laughed at me. Define leak, he said. I don't know how else to say it. Like there's a version of tonight where something happened and a version where it didn't. And every so often the wall between them gets thin enough that I can see through. That's not how superposition works outside a controlled system. It's not how it works, period. Once you look at it, which is the entire headache of the field, he pushes the glasses up again, the same knuckle. But say it was happening. Say the isolation weren't total. I would expect it to look like ghosts. I'd expect it to look exactly like you're describing. Small, deniable, something you'd only notice if you were paying unusually close attention to a room nobody else was watching. Then I'd want your data, he said finally. Formally, in writing, with timestamps. I never gave it to him formally. Instead, I asked the staffing agency to move up my end date by 2 weeks. Told them a family situation had come up. A lie precise enough that nobody asked a follow-up question. There's part of that last night I haven't told anyone, including the agency. Walking out through the lobby a little after midnight, badge already off, I saw the version of me from 9 days earlier. The one from the maintenance closet, standing near the front doors, checking a clipboard I recognised as my own handwriting from the exact shift. She looked up, toward where I was standing. I don't think she saw me the way I was seeing her. I think, for her, in that particular slice of the hallway, it was still empty. I didn't call out, I didn't test it, didn't wave, didn't do any of the things I'd have done if this were a story instead of my actual life. I set my badge on the security desk, walked to my car, and drove home with the radio off the entire way, because I didn't trust myself to notice if a song came around twice. I looked Haldane metrology up online about 8 months later, mostly on a night I couldn't sleep. The listing was gone. Not shut down with a notice, not sold, not renamed, just absent. The way a search result is absent for a business that technically never filed the paperwork to exist. I called the staffing agency to ask if they had any record of the contract on file, and the woman who answered checked twice and told me, not unkindly, that she had nothing under the name for that quarter, and asked if I might be thinking of a different client. I do feel calibration now. Bridges, dam sensors, outdoor sites. Jobs where the only thing that could theoretically be in 2 places at once is me. And even then, only in the ordinary, boring way, running late, wishing I were somewhere else. I've never gone back inside a lab building since, but I still do the thing I started doing that last week at Haldane. Every single morning, before I let myself do anything else, I check where I left the coffee mug the night before. Wherever it was when I went to sleep is where it has been when I wake up. Left of the sink stays left of the sink. If it's ever on the right, I don't get up right away. I lie there for a minute first, and think hard about which version of the morning I actually want to be having. I grew up on Avril Street, in a town small enough that downtown was 4 blocks and a single stoplight that everyone just called the light, like there wasn't another one for 40 miles in any direction. I moved away at 18 and came back at 34 because my mother died in March and somebody had to clear the house before the estate sale we'd already scheduled for June. I'm telling you this the way I tell the police report, because for about 2 weeks I genuinely considered filing one before I understood there was nothing anybody could actually arrest. The house sits on the corner of Arville and 3rd, directly across 3rd, where I remembered a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign, Arville Street Diner, red block letters, standing there since the 70s. There was a church there now, white clapboard, a modest steeple, a plastic letter sign out front advertising a Wednesday potluck. Not new construction, weathered, established, the kind of building that had clearly occupied that exact lot for decades. I stood in my mother's porch the first morning back and stared at it for a good 4 minutes before I said anything to my brother Wes, who'd flown in the day before me to start clearing out the garage. When did the diner become a church? Wes was tapping 2 fingers against his jaw, a habit he'd had since we were kids, always when he was annoyed or cornered by something. What diner? The diner, Arville Street Diner. We had pancakes there every single Sunday until I was 15. You and me and Mom. The corner booth by the window. That's been Grace Fellowship as long as I can remember. Tap, tap. Are you feeling okay? You've had a hell of a month. I decided he was messing with me, the way we used to mess with each other constantly as kids, and I let it go for exactly 1 day. Then I found the receipts. My mother kept everything. Every bill, every greeting card, every scrap of paper going back decades, in shoeboxes stacked in a hall closet, because that was the kind of woman she was. In one of them I found a paper placement, the disposable diner kind, folded into quarters. Arville Street Diner printed across the top in the same red letters I remembered, with a hand-drawn tic-tac-toe game in the corner in handwriting I recognised instantly as my own, 9 or 10 years old. I brought it straight to Wes. He looked at it for a long moment, turned it over like there'd been an explanation printed on the back, and handed it back to me with his jaw-tapping hand gone completely still, which was somehow worse than if he'd kept tapping. Maybe it used to be a diner before we were born, before it was a church. I have a tic-tac-toe game I drew on this exact placemat, Wes. I remember drawing it. I remember losing to you at it. Then maybe you're remembering it wrong. Everyone forgets things. I decided that was all it was. Grief doing something strange to a stress-fogged memory. Until I went to the county assessor's office to ask about the property, mostly to prove myself wrong once and for all. The clerk pulled the record without hesitation. Grace Fellowship Church of Arville Street, continuously occupying the lot since 1961, according to the deed history on file. No diner listed anywhere in the chain of title, not ever. I went back to the church itself on a Tuesday and told the pastor, a soft-spoken man named Harmon, who kept his hands folded the entire conversation like he was perpetually mid-prayer, that I used to eat at a diner on this exact corner as a kid. People do sometimes mix up Arville with the 3rd Street over in Holloway, he said gently. There was a diner over there, I believe, years back. Holloway is 11 miles away. I have never once been in Holloway in my life. I went to the library next, which still had the same reference librarian who'd worked there since I was a kid. A woman named Ruth, who remembered my mother by name and hugged me for a long moment before I could even ask my question. I asked her to help me find old town directories, the kind that list every business by street address year over year. She pulled 3 volumes without hesitation, decades apart, and in every single one, 3rd Street's listing for that lot read Grace Fellowship Church, going back further than my own memory could possibly reach. I asked Ruth, as casually as I could manage, if she remembered a diner ever operating there. Not on that corner, she said, sliding her glasses down to check the page again anyway, out of what looked like genuine curiosity rather than doubting me. There was a diner on 3rd over in Holloway, I want to say, or maybe it was a soda counter inside the old pharmacy here in town. Memory plays tricks the longer you're away from a place, sweetheart. Happens everybody. She said it kindly, the way you'd reassure someone grieving. That kindness was worse than if she had argued with me, because it meant even the town's most careful record keeper had nothing in her that resisted the version everyone else already believed. I stopped telling people after that conversation. Not because I doubted myself. The placemat was real, sitting in a shoebox in my mother's front hall, physical evidence I could hold in both hands. Just because every single person I told had an answer ready, calm and reasonable, and just slightly too fast. But because every single person I told had an answer ready, calm and reasonable and just slightly too fast, the way you'd answer a question you'd already rehearsed, I started to wonder if the town wasn't confused at all. I started to wonder if I had simply agreed, collectively and silently, to remember it a different way, and I was the only resident who'd somehow missed the memo, or hadn't been edited along with everyone else. I ended up taking 5 weeks to clear the house instead of the 2 I'd planned, partly for the estate sale itself, and partly because I kept finding more of my mother's shoeboxes and couldn't make myself stop looking for more proof. I found 4 more placemats in total. I also found a church bulletin from Grace Fellowship, dated to the same June as one of the diner placemats, both apparently happening in the same building in the same month, filed 6 folders apart. Like even my own mother had never once noticed the contradiction sitting in her own closet. "You keep these on purpose?" I said to Wes near the end, holding all 5 placemats, fanned out like a hand of cards. "Mom kept these on purpose. Somebody in this family knew." He didn't tap his jaw that time. He just looked tired. Or she liked pancakes and never threw away anything. I don't know what you want me to say. At the estate agent itself, an older man browsing my mother's kitchenware mentioned, unprompted, that he used to walk past this corner every morning on his way to the mill before it closed, and that the church had always anchored the block, steady as anything, longer than most marriages in this town lasted. I asked him, holding my breath a little, if he remembered it any other way. He looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd asked you if the sky had ever been a different colour. "Only way I've ever known it," he said, and went back to examining a stack of my mother's mixing bowls, like the conversation had already ended for him, because it had. The estate sale happened on a Saturday in early June. I sold the house 2 weeks later to a couple from 2 towns over who never once asked about the church across the street, because why would they? Before I handed over the keys, I stood on the porch one evening and tried, honestly, to talk myself into their version of things. Maybe grief really had reshaped 6 years of Sunday memories into something they had never been. Maybe a placemat could exist in a shoebox for reasons that had nothing to do with this specific corner. I wanted, more than I wanted almost anything else that spring, to be the one who was wrong, because being wrong would have meant that the world still worked the way everyone else agreed it did. On my last morning in Avril, I sat on a porch with a mug of coffee on the original placemat, the one with the tic-tac-toe game, propped against the porch rail where the morning light hit it. I took a photo on my phone because I wanted proof that would outlast the shoebox and outlast me still doubting myself at 2 in the morning. When I looked down to check the photo had come out clearly, the placemat in the picture read Grace Fellowship Church of Avril Street across the top in the same red print, in a font that one photograph earlier I would have sworn belonged to the diner. I looked up from the phone at the real placemat, still sitting on a rail 6 inches from my hand. It still said Avril Street Diner, red letters, my 9-year-old tic-tac-toe game in the corner exactly where I left it. I picked it up and held it against the morning light, turned it over, checked every edge for anything that might explain what the paragraph had shown me. Nothing had changed about the object itself, only the version of it that existed on a screen, one layer removed from my hands, had decided to agree with everyone else in town. It still says Avril Street Diner today, in a box in a closet of the apartment I live in now, 4 states away. I never let myself photograph it again, and I've never gone back to Avril, not even to visit my mother's grave, because I'm not entirely sure which building I'd find waiting across the street when I got there. Some proof, I've decided, only survives if you never test it twice. I did 2 seasons as a contractor for the State Parks Department, mostly trail maintenance, but for 6 weeks last October and November, I picked up overnight shifts at a remote gauging station called Cold Fork, an hour past cell coverage. A decommissioned Army Corps building had been repurposed to log river level data feeding a flood warning network for 3 counties downstream. The job was simple enough. Walk the half-mile boardwalk out to the sensor housing every 4 hours. Confirm the readings match what the automated system reported back to the district office. Log it by hand as backup in case the transmitter dropped, and don't fall into the river in the dark. I was 26, I needed the overtime badly, and I didn't believe in anything I couldn't put a number on. The building had history nobody fully explained to me up front. It had been an Army Corps hydrology post since the 1950s, and before that, according to a laminated sheet taped inside a supply closet, a fur trading outpost sometime in the 1800s. My supervisor, a district logistics coordinator named Deb, who clicked her pen twice, always exactly twice, before saying anything she considered important, told me flatly not to worry about the history. She said, old buildings creak and settle, don't read into it. 9 nights into the contract, on my 2 a.m. walk out to the sensor housing, I heard someone say a name that wasn't mine, clearly and from a distance of maybe 10 feet, somewhere off the boardwalk in the tree line. Whitmore, a man's voice. It was older, with a clipped formal accent I couldn't place. I stopped walking, said hello into the dark, but got nothing back. I decided it was hikers, or hunters camped somewhere off trail, or my own ears doing something strange after 5 straight hours of river noise. The station itself was a long room split into a front office and a back equipment bay, with a single bunk for the overnight person to catch an hour of sleep between rounds if the river was behaving. A framed black and white photo hung by the door. Army Corps surveyors standing on an earlier version of the same boardwalk sometime in the 50s. Beside it, smaller and older, a hand-tinted photograph of 2 men in trappers' coats that the laminated history sheet identified only as personnel pre-1900, names unrecorded. I found myself eating dinner under the second photo most nights after the Whitmore incident, close enough to make out the taller man's face. I never once, for the rest of the contract, felt entirely alone doing it. In a way I couldn't have explained to Deb without her clicking that pen at me twice. The second incident was worse. 4 nights later, same walk, same hour, I saw a lantern light moving along the tree line, roughly parallel to my own path for close to 30 seconds before it simply went out. An actual open flame, swinging with a person's stride. Nobody carries a lantern anymore. Everyone uses headlamps, mine included. And according to every piece of equipment on my belt, my headlamp was the only working light source within a mile. I stood completely still on the boardwalk. I told myself it was swamp gas and a bad night's sleep, because that phrase felt like something a reasonable person would say out loud, and I wanted very badly, in that moment, to still be a reasonable person. The following week I found the ledger. It was wedged behind a loose panel in the equipment bay, water damage and most pages fused together, but the cover page was legible enough. A hand-logged record of river readings, dated in a column format I recognised instantly because it was almost identical to the one I used every night, except the entry stopped in November of 1841, and the handwriting on the final page was noticeably more hurried than the pages before it. The numbers were pressed hard enough into the paper to have torn right through 2 places. I didn't show it to Deb. I put it back exactly where I found it, behind the same panel, and convinced myself that that was the end of it, which, even in the moment, felt like a promise I already knew I wouldn't keep. By the 3rd week, I was hearing the voice regularly enough that I'd given it a shape in my head, without meaning to. An older man, methodical, reading numbers aloud to himself the same way I read gauge numbers aloud to myself on my rounds. Like the 2 of us were doing the same job, 80-some years apart. Every so often, the sound carried across whatever gap separated us. I never mentioned the voice to Deb. I did mention the lantern. Once, carefully, choosing my words the way you choose them when you already suspect how they'll land. She clicked her pen twice. She said, "Are you getting enough sleep out there, Theo?" "I know exactly how it sounds," I said. "There's no lantern function to this job. There's a headlamp and a clipboard, and that's the whole list. Click, click. You want off nights? All you've got to do is say so. No shame in it," she said. I told her I was fine. I wasn't entirely lying. The fear had started to feel less like danger and more like company some nights, which worried me considerably more than the voice itself did. The last incident happened on what was supposed to be my final scheduled night, the 2nd week of November. I was out in the boardwalk at 2 in the morning, gauge reading well within normal range, when the voice said something, close enough this time that I felt it should have had breath behind it. "Get off the crossing," it said. "It's coming up fast tonight." Then, a beat later, a number, not a gauge reading I recognised from any shift that season, something considerably higher than anything the station had logged all year. I ran the rest of the boardwalk back to the station instead of finishing my walk to the sensor housing. I logged nothing. I sat inside with every light in the building on until sunrise, feeling foolish and completely unable to make myself go back out. 4 days later, a storm system stalled over the watershed for 18 hours, and the river came up faster than the automated model had predicted. fast enough that the flood warning reached the 3 downstream counties later than it should have, and fast enough that the boardwalk crossing I'd been standing on that night was underwater and structurally compromised by the time district maintenance reached it the next morning. Nobody was hurt. The gauge reading logged automatically at the peak once maintenance restored the transmitter, and it matched almost to the figure the device had given me 4 nights earlier. A figure I had never written down anywhere, that only I had heard. I drove out with the maintenance crew 2 days after the water receded, mostly to see the boardwalk crossing for myself. The actual planks I had been standing on if I had finished my round that night instead of running back to the station. 2 sections were gone entirely, torn clean off their pilings and never recovered downstream. A 3rd section was there but split down the centre, the kind of split that wouldn't have held a person's weight for more than a step or 2. I stood on the intact part of the boardwalk for a long time, looking at the gap, doing the math on where exactly I'd have been standing at 2 in the morning if the voice hadn't have told me otherwise. I told Deb everything, all of it, the voice, the lantern, the name that wasn't mine, and the number I'd carried in my head for 4 days and told no one. She didn't click her pen this time. She let me finish, and when I was done she said quietly, "I've had 2 other contractors ask off nights at the station over the years. Neither one told me why. I never asked either of them, and I'm not going to ask you." I asked, "Doesn't it worry you, running the station overnight at all?" "It worries me enough that I've stopped assigning new hires there for their first season," she said. "Been doing that for a while now actually. Nobody upstairs has ever asked me why, so I've never had to explain it in writing." Click click, out of habit this time, not emphasis. "You did the right thing calling it in. Most people just quit and don't say." I finished out my last 2 weeks on day shift instead, at my own request, and Deb approved it without a single follow-up question, which told me more than anything she could have said out loud. On a slow afternoon near the end of the contract, I looked up the name in the State Historical Archives' digitised fur trade records. A trapper named Josiah Whitmore was listed as having drowned near the exact stretch of river in an 1841 flood that arrived, according to the one surviving written account from that winter, considerably faster than anyone downstream had expected. I asked the crew foreman offhand whether Cold Fork would get rebuilt with the same crossing point or moved somewhere upstream. He said upstream, further from the old channel bend, a decision already signed off before I'd even called it in. Nobody told me my report had anything to do with it, and I never asked, the same way Deb had never asked me anything she didn't need to know the answer to. I don't work overnight shifts anymore, not at Cold Fork, not anywhere. I still do trail maintenance. I still love the job. I still don't believe in much I can't measure with an actual instrument. But I keep a laminated card in my field bag now, the kind meant for emergency contacts, and on the back of it, in my own handwriting, I've written down that number. Not because I think I'll ever need it again, because I want it to exist somewhere outside my own head, on paper, in case anyone else out there ever hears it too, and needs to know they're not the only one.